July 26th, 2018. A tornado just formed. Inside a wildfire.
911, your emergency.
I'm in a dozer. All the windows got blown out. I got my curtains down. I can't last too long here.
Okay, if you can get out safely, get out, okay?
I can't. I can have a ride out of here. All on fire around it.
143 miles per hour, 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, 18,000 feet tall.
The fire tornado exploded in the middle of what was already a gigantic, devastating wildfire. It was so unusual that even CAL FIRE investigators are still struggling to completely understand it.
The National Weather Service had never issued a warning for anything like it. Fire crews on the ground had never trained for it. Scientists had never documented one inside the United States before, and it was moving directly toward a city of 90,000 people. This is the story of the first documented fire tornado in United States history.
Wow. Yeah, wow.
But to understand how a wildfire builds a tornado, you have to go back 3 days, because what happened in Redding wasn't just a wildfire. It was the exact set of conditions needed to create something no one had seen before. The region sits in the northern Sacramento Valley, wedged between mountain ranges on both sides. In spring, cool, moist air rolls in from the Pacific, but by July, that picture changes completely. As that same air descends the eastern slopes of the mountains, it loses its moisture rapidly. What reaches the valley floor is hot, bone-dry air that acts like a furnace, pulling moisture out of vegetation, out of soil, out of everything it touches. By midsummer, the hillsides around Redding are covered in dry grass and brittle brush. It is, in every sense of the word, a powder keg. The summer of 2018 had been particularly punishing.
When we expect some of the peak heat to hit in parts of the California Central Valley, we're expecting that sunshine and really this ridge of high pressure, the classic setup for a heat wave. And so we just continue day after day to bring those temperatures up.
After a prolonged drought from 2012 to 2016, a brief wet period had encouraged dense vegetation growth across Northern California. By 2018, all of that new growth had dried out completely. There was more fuel on the ground than there had been in years. A record-breaking heat wave pushed temperatures in Redding to over 110 degrees Fahrenheit for days on end. On July 26th itself, the thermometer in Redding reached 113 degrees. The air was so dry, so superheated, that it was already doing half the fire's work before a single flame touched it. All it needed was a spark. On the afternoon of July 23rd, a vehicle towing a travel trailer was driving along State Route 299 near Carr Powerhouse Road, west of Redding. One of the trailer's tires blew out. The steel rim scraped the pavement. The sparks it generated ignited dry vegetation along the highway's edge almost instantly. The car fire had begun. In its first 2 days, the car fire was large but manageable, spreading uphill through the dry hills west of Redding while crews worked to cut containment lines. Difficult terrain and steep slopes complicated the effort, but the fire was not yet the monster it was about to become. That changed on July 26th, and everything accelerated. A powerful weather system to the north began pushing strong winds southward across the region. These winds didn't just fan the existing fire, they fundamentally changed its character. By approximately 5:30 p.m., the car fire transitioned from a fuel-dominated fire, where terrain and vegetation dictate movement, to a wind-driven fire, where the wind itself becomes the engine. This is one of the most dangerous states a wildfire can enter, and almost no one on the ground realized it had already reached that point. The fire exploded eastward and downhill, racing toward the western suburbs of Redding at terrifying speed. It moved 3 miles east in just 4 hours. It jumped the Sacramento River.
All right, this is crazy. I'm crazy. It's already jumped the river. There's a reservoir right there where that giant smoke is. It's on the reservoir side. I'm out of here.
Evacuation orders went out to 38,000 residents.
A wall of flames takes down everything in its path. Tonight, a staggering new count. Hundreds of homes destroyed, thousands more threatened. The all-night battle to stop the fire raging in Redding.
Firefighters scrambled to keep pace with a fire that was now outrunning almost every response. For people in its path, the science didn't matter anymore. Zita Bila, who lived in the Lake Keswick Estates neighborhood of Redding, did not receive her evacuation order until she could already see the flames. There was only one road out of her neighborhood. It was backed up with cars. She told her children to pray. She recalls feeling the heat through her windows as she waited in traffic, watching the fire close in from behind. They made it out, barely. Several miles to the north, 81-year-old Don Smith, a contract bulldozer operator, was working to cut a fire line above the Spring Creek Reservoir when the fire overran his position. A crew chief made multiple radio attempts to reach him, urging him to get out. 2 firefighters tried to reach him on foot. The encroaching flames forced them back. 4 helicopters dropped water through the smoke and fire around his last known location. The pilots had to guess. They couldn't see the ground. It was so hot that one helicopter's temperature warning light flicked on, and at 6:08 p.m., it was forced to land. Don Smith and his open cab bulldozer were nowhere to be found. CAL FIRE spokesman Scott McLean summed up what crews were facing that evening. The fire was moving so fast, he said, that law enforcement was doing evacuations as fast as they could. There was little anyone could do to slow it down. But something else was beginning to happen above the fire. Something that very few people on the ground had ever witnessed before, and something that none of them had a name for yet. As the Carr fire exploded in intensity on the evening of July 26th, it began releasing enormous amounts of heat energy into the atmosphere far above it. That heat drove powerful columns of hot gas and smoke rising rapidly into the sky. At around 7:20 p.m., those columns punched through a layer of stable air above them and burst into the upper atmosphere. Within just 15 minutes, the updrafts doubled in height, shooting from 6 miles to 12 miles above the Earth. They reached an altitude of 39,000 feet, above the cruising altitude of commercial aircraft. This triggered the formation of what scientists call a pyrocumulonimbus, or pyro-CB, essentially a fire-generated thunderstorm cloud. The fire was no longer just burning, it was creating its own weather system. As the massive cloud grew, it began stretching the column of air below it, concentrating existing rotation near the surface. Wind shear near the ground, areas where air was blowing in sharply different directions at different heights, combined with the enormous updraft to rapidly organize that rotation into a coherent, intensifying vortex. This was no longer just a wildfire. It was becoming something else, a tornado. The fire tornado began touching down near Land Park in Redding at approximately 7:30 p.m. At its base, it measured 1,000 feet across. It reached an estimated height of 18,000 feet into the sky. The winds inside measured 143 miles per hour, the equivalent of an EF3 tornado, strong enough to level homes. The temperature within the vortex reached an estimated 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. For reference, that is roughly the melting point of steel. The footage captured that night looks like something pulled straight out of hell. It was the strongest tornado of any kind ever recorded in the history of California, and only the second true fire tornado ever scientifically documented anywhere in the world, after one observed during the 2003 Canberra bushfires in Australia. As it moved, it left a damage path that looked nothing like a wildfire and everything like a violent tornado. Trees were debarked and snapped. Ground scouring appeared beneath the vortex, soil stripped from the earth exactly as it is beneath the most violent conventional storms. Massive electrical transmission towers, engineered to withstand extreme loads, collapsed. A steel pipe was found wrapped around a tree. Homes that the fire itself had not touched were still destroyed, roofs torn off, walls blown out by winds that had no business existing inside a wildfire. 3 bulldozer operators, Don Andrews, Terry Cummings, and Jimmy Jones, were suddenly engulfed while working nearby. All 3 machines had their windows shatter simultaneously as rocks, burning embers, and debris bombarded the cabs.
This is nuts.
911, your emergency.
I'm in a dozer on Buenaventura up by Lake Avenue. All the windows got blown out. I got my curtains down. I don't know if you guys behind me are alive. I can't last too long here.
Okay, if you can get out safely, get out, okay?
I can't. You know, I have to have a ride out of here. It's all on fire around it. Can I give you my wife's phone number? Tell her I love her.
All 3 survived, barely. Unbeknownst to all of them, less than a mile away, a Redding fire inspector had already radioed his final transmission. Jeremy Stoke was 37 years old. He was a fire prevention inspector with the Redding Fire Department. Not a firefighter on the line, but a man whose job that evening was to drive through neighborhoods and make sure people had gotten out. When the Carr fire ignited on July 23rd, Jeremy had been on vacation. He cut it 4 days short. He volunteered to come back. When the fire transitioned to wind-driven and began racing toward the city on the evening of July 26th, Jeremy was already on the street. He was not fighting the fire. He was protecting people from it. At 7:39 p.m., with the fire tornado bearing down on Buenaventura Boulevard, Jeremy radioed his mayday. He stated his location. He asked for a water drop. He said he was getting burned over. There was no response. The official CAL FIRE investigation concluded that Jeremy Stoke suffered fatal traumatic injuries when entrapped in the fire tornado while engaged in community protection operations. He was located in the early morning hours of July 27th. He was the first firefighter in documented history to lose their life to a fire tornado. His colleagues described him as someone who cared deeply about the people of Redding. His final act was driving toward danger to make sure his neighbors had made it out. They had. He had not. Jeremy was not the only one lost that evening. When the smoke finally cleared, a pilot spotted Don's bulldozer from the air. It had been completely engulfed. There was no sign of the protective metallic fire shelter that firefighters deploy as a last resort. Don Smith did not survive. Both deaths, Jeremy's and Don's, occurred within an hour and 50 minutes along a single 3-mile stretch of the Carr fire. Meanwhile, in a quiet residential neighborhood on the northern edge of the fire's path, the tornado's wind field was sweeping over homes that had nothing to do with the fire line. Ed Bledsoe had evacuated earlier that day, but his wife, Melody Bledsoe, 70 years old, had been unable to leave in time. Ed Bledsoe later told reporters that Melody had been on the phone with him as it happened. She told him the tornado was directly overhead. Those were among her last words. When Ed was finally able to return, nothing was left.
I was talking to my little grandson on the phone. He's saying, "Grandpa, please, you got to come and help us. The fire's at the back door." I said, "I'm right by you, honey. Just hold on. Grandpa's coming."
Melody Bledsoe and her 2 young great-grandchildren didn't make it. In total, the Carr Fire tornado directly claimed 4 lives. The Carr Fire as a whole claimed 8, destroyed 1,604 structures, burned 229,651 acres, and caused over $1.6 billion in damage. By 8 p.m. on July 26th, the fire tornado had dissipated. It had been on the ground for approximately 30 minutes. The Carr Fire itself continued burning for 5 more weeks, finally contained on August 30th. By then, entire neighborhoods of Reading were gone, half of the historic town of French Gulch, all but 2 houses in Keswick. Communities across Shasta and Trinity counties had been permanently changed. In the scientific community, the event generated immediate and significant research. A study published in Geophysical Research Letters documented the fire tornado in detail, finding that it formed through processes nearly identical to conventional tornado dynamics. Not simply a product of fire heat, but a genuine atmospheric vortex driven by a fire-generated supercell. The authors concluded that radar data had contained advance indicators of the vortex that could, in the future, be used to issue warnings. Jeremy Stokes' name is now written into wildfire training materials across California. The way fire agencies plan for extreme fire behavior, particularly the danger to personnel who are nowhere near a fire line, was changed by what happened on Buenaventura Boulevard. Before July 26, 2018, the idea of a fire generating its own tornado was something most people would have called impossible. After Reading, it became something fire crews across the American West now plan for, train for, and watch for at the start of every fire season. Because the conditions that created it, the heat, the drought, the wind shear, the fuel, are not gone, they are still there, every summer. Firefighters know how to fight fire. They know how to read wind, but nobody taught them how to survive a tornado made of both. After July 26, 2018, because now they know it can happen, and the next time it happens, they may not get a warning either. If you made it this far, thank you for being here. These stories take time to research, write, and edit, and every single view, like, and comment helps keep them going.